The group that received the maternal colostrum with just the replacer added directly to, like mixed in dry, those calves achieved a serum IgG level that was statistically equal to the high quality maternal colostrum.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Dairy Science Digest. This is a podcast designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to the ears of dairy producers. I'm Reagan Bluel from the University of Missouri Dairy Team, and our guest today comes from the University of Minnesota in St. Paul. Dr. Sandra Godden is a professor in the College of Veterinary Medicine and is well written on the topic of colostrum. And this month, her current article in press for the Journal of Dairy Science that we're featuring today is the Controlled Field Study investigating two methods of enriching moderate quality maternal colostrum on transfer of passive immunity and well-being of neonatal calves. So we've all been in that situation. Cow freshens, you get her milked out, you test the colostrum, but mama's colostrum tests a little short of where you'd like. But then what? Sure, it would be great to go and get frozen colostrum out of the freezer, but in reality, that takes a lot of time and effort to thaw. So there's these colostrum replacers that are on the market. But what is the most ideal way to feed that while still getting moderate coverage from the maternal colostrum? And that, as the title suggests, is exactly what we're going to talk about today. And to best understand that, she and her team enrolled 132 calves on one of four different treatments. But before we get into the treatments, Doc, I'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, Reagan. Well, thank you first for having me here today to talk about this paper. We're really excited about the work and the opportunity to share it with your audience. Yeah, I'm a professor at the College of Vet Med at the University of Minnesota. I've been here about 26 years, eek. And yeah, one of my favorite areas of research is colostrum management in calves.
And that's exactly what we're doing here. It's just having a little bit of discussion about how can we make sure that when nature doesn't provide us with the most ideal, I like to call colostrum liquid gold, right?
Yeah.
So if we don't have the most ideal colostrum, we're gonna maybe hopefully supplement it a little bit. So let's dive right into the experimental design. Could you describe the four different treatments, and then we'll go into the why we were looking at these different treatments?
Sure. And if you don't mind, Reagan, I'll start with the why and then get into the, okay, so how did we address that question?
Sure thing.
As you mentioned, yeah, occasionally a cow will calve and she doesn't have sufficiently high quality colostrum or maybe not enough colostrum. My preference is always to have high quality colostrum in storage. So I would encourage producers to bank surplus colostrum when they have it. That's always the cheaper, better way to go. But if you don't have stored colostrum or, time is of the essence and you need to just feed the calf and get on with your day, reaching for colostrum supplements or colostrum replacers, it's a really useful tool to have available. What this study was focused on, you could look at supplementing low or moderate quality colostrum by adding some colostrum replacer to it. There has been some past research looking at exactly that question, enriching either low or moderate quality colostrum by adding a dry powdered colostrum replacer directly into the colostrum. And the results in those previous studies were kind of mixed. In some cases, the study observed an improvement in serum immunoglobulin G or serum antibody levels in the calves that were fed the enriched colostrum. But in other studies, there was no improvement. And when the researchers got into looking at, why might they be, they noticed that almost consistently across the board, when we add colostrum replacers to maternal colostrum, the efficiency of absorption of IgG goes down as compared to just straight pure maternal colostrum. One hypothesis as to why that might be is, well, maybe by spiking the dry powder directly into maternal colostrum and not reconstituting it in water first, as the label would direct, maybe we're creating a extra thick solution, high in total solids, high hyperosmolarity, if you will. And the concern is that an excessively high osmolality might result in interference of abomasal emptying or the gut motility, basically moving the colostrum into the small intestine where the antibodies can be absorbed.
Let's talk about that just for a little bit. Let's dive into exactly that abomasal emptying
Uh-huh.
and specifically on osmolarity of
Mhm.
the solution. And so we know that when we're feeding a milk replacer, osmolarity really matters. And
Yeah,
we have those discussions. Here we are in winter, and sometimes folks will increase the amount of total solid in their milk replacer and really kind of disrupt or disturb the osmolarity. So let's talk a little bit about osmolarity and impacts on a milk replacer side of things, and then
sure.
how that might be different from colostrum.
Yeah. So we think we know a whole lot more about the importance of not getting excessively high osmolality in milk or milk replacer solutions. The normal osmolality of whole milk, what mom would have produced, is about 300 milliosmol, give or take. And the calf's digestive system is evolved to deal with that. That is normal. But to your point, Reagan, if we start adding powder, like milk replacer balancers, for example, directly into milk or milk replacer, and we get that osmolality too high, 500, 600, 700 milliosmol or higher, it has been observed that we can create problems. The gut motility slows down, and that's reflected in reduced abomasal emptying. We can see in some calves, not all, but in some calves, more scours, abomasal bloat, clostridial enteritis. So it's something to be concerned about. We want to avoid. So, yeah, to your point about milk replacer feeding programs, we want to monitor what the total solids or the osmolality might be, and we want to avoid excessively high numbers. So, my preference would always be to feed a mixture that is more normal in terms of osmolality, closer to what
Sure.
mom would have made. And if you want to get more solids into the calf, you just simply feed more volume,
Hmm.
not a higher concentration. That would be the safer route to go. So that's on
Sure.
milk and milk replacers, but we really don't know how that or if that translates to this question of directly spiking colostrum replacer into maternal colostrum. Is it the same problem or not? So circling back, that's kind of what led us to this research.
The question. Yeah.
Back to the colostrum, we were wondering if the lower absorption rate in spiked colostrum in previous studies, could that be because of excessive osmolality? Well, then one possible solution to that would be to simply reconstitute the powder in water first, according to
Hmm.
the directions, and then add that reconstituted mixture to our maternal colostrum. So,
That would generate a volume that's typically a
correct.
lot larger than what those little baby calves are feeding, which was kind of a second phase of your project, looking at the behavior of the calf with these
Yeah.
different volumes too. So yeah, so let's define those four different treatments, the positive and negative control.
Yeah, our four treatment group, negative control was the moderate quality maternal colostrum,
Which how many IgGs was that?
roughly 60 grams per liter of IgG. That would be the concentration in that group. The positive control would be the high quality maternal colostrum. That is roughly 90 grams per liter of IgG. And then in the middle, we had our two test groups, the moderate quality maternal colostrum enriched with a colostrum replacer that was just added direct dry,
Directly.
and
Hmm.
that would create a more thick, higher osmolality, but be pretty convenient for producers to do,
Hmm.
obviously, and create a smaller end volume. Versus the other treatment group was mixing the colostrum replacer in water first, then adding that to the maternal colostrum.
I can kind of just imagine. Let's be real, guys. Let's think about this day to day, and
Hmm.
you've got your bibs on, and
Yep.
you've got one bottle of this reconstituted, you got the other bottle of Mama's colostrum, and you're fumbling and tubing, and
Yep.
so it's just
Added
I could
work,
see.
added volume. Yep.
Yeah, it's so much easier just to add that dry replacer to the colostrum directly. So I can definitely see why this question was desirable
Yep.
to the field, and applaud you guys for really taking the time to study it.
So we wanted to measure serum immunoglobulin G. That's our major output,
Hmm.
transfer passive immunity. But we also wanted to look at the impacts on calf behavior because, to your point, we were feeding a smaller volume in one group, a larger volume in the other, the reconstituted group, and other outputs or other impacts, potential impacts, such as appetite on the next day or
Hmm.
health over the next 3 days.
One thing that I found really awesome as I was reading through, listeners probably all know this, but in your paper, table 3, it talked about what the serum IgG was at hour 0, right? And so we all know these calves are born with virtually no immunoglobulin G, and that is what designs or creates their passive immunity and therefore success going forward in life. But to me, I don't know, when I opened up this page to table 3, it just, which all of you guys can do by clicking the link at the bottom of the show. It's just, I don't know, it reminded me that we are responsible for this calf's success, right? And I don't want to go on that tangent for very long, but it's important. It's really important. And if she doesn't have the groceries that she needs to generate that ideal scenario in her gut, then she's likely going to fail. But that didn't happen with this group of calves. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the results that you did see. All the listeners are probably most interested on health effects and what those IgG concentrations looked like 24 hours later.
Yeah. So we had some surprising results, which which is what's fun about science. Sometimes your original hypothesis gets rejected and you learn something new. But I was surprised, but we saw some really good results. As predicted, if we compare the negative control and the positive control, the two unenriched groups of moderate or high quality maternal colostrum, the high quality maternal colostrum group achieved much higher serum IgG levels than the moderate quality, and that was to be expected. But what was interesting was when we looked at our two enriched groups, the group that received the maternal colostrum with just the replacer added directly to, like mixed in
Mm-hmm.
dry, those calves achieved a serum IgG level that was statistically equal to the high quality maternal colostrum, which is good. That was
Mm-hmm.
great.
It's so convenient.
Yeah,
Yay.
yeah, it worked. But the group that had the reconstituted, we mixed
Mm-hmm.
powder in water first and then we added it to the maternal colostrum, they did not get the same bump in serum
Mm-hmm.
IgG. So it was actually counter to our original hypothesis.
We probably need to rewind a little bit
Yeah,
and discuss the actual product that you use because
yeah,
we there's so many different types of colostrum replacer out there on the shelves. Could you talk about what do producers need to look for when they're selecting those?
yeah. This is based on prior research that we've done. I would prefer, if you're going to pick a supplement or a replacer, I would much prefer to pick a product that is lacteal derived. What that means is it's coming from cows, surplus colostrum from farms, second or third milking transition milk with high levels of antibodies from farms. I would prefer a cow derived product, if you will, not something
Not
else.
soybeans. Yes.
Correct. Well,
Yeah.
no, there's immunoglobulin G or immunoglobulins in all colostrum replacers. The question is, where did it come from?
Mm.
There are numerous products out in the marketplace where that IgG comes from maternal colostrum. So many farms, probably many of your listeners, are freezing and selling surplus colostrum to companies who take it, heat treat it, spray dry it, and package it into a bag. But the point is, it's coming from a cow, that
Mhm.
immunoglobulin G and all the other nutrients and fats and components. I believe those products perform better in calves than there are some other products in the market where the immunoglobulin is coming from blood. So it's harvested from steers who are slaughtered at an abattoir. They collect the blood, they separate the plasma, they spray dried pure Ig powder, and that's great, like that's immunoglobulins, but it's missing all of the other components,
Mhm.
the fats, the bioactive compounds, all the other vitamins, etc., that mom would have put in. And in our hands, at least, there are enough differences in those blood-derived or plasma-derived products that they don't seem to perform as well as the lacteal or the colostrum-derived product. So that would be my first choice, is choose a colostrum-derived product. After that, I would like a USDA licensed product that just
Mm.
guarantees the quality, the safety, the efficacy. And after that, I just want people to feed a sufficient dose,
Mhm.
enough grams of globulin protein to achieve whatever their goal is. Now, in this study, we were supplementing, so we were, adding a smaller dose perhaps to the maternal colostrum to raise it up to our target dose. But if you were feeding it as a standalone because you had zero maternal colostrum on hand, then you want to make sure you're getting at least a couple of 100 grams
Hmm.
of IgG into that calf. So a sufficient dose. That would be my third wish when you're working with colostrum replacers. So you asked what product were we feeding in this study? We were feeding a product called Premolac, Premolac, Premolac from Zinpro Corporation, based here in Minnesota. So I'm putting roughly 100 grams of the product into our maternal colostrum.
And so how does that particular product differ from other colostrum replacers out there on the market?
Yeah, it is maternal derived, so that's good. It is a little bit tweaked, however. There are other products out in the market that are more, I will call them more of a full composition. The most of the fat, most of the protein, most of the other solids that were in the colostrum, the dam originally produced, in addition to the antibodies, are retained in that dried product. But the Promolac is a little bit different in that they've separated out the IG. They've somewhat purified. It's not completely pure, but they've somewhat purified the IG component so that it produces a smaller total mass or
Volume.
dose
Hmm.
that is in the bag that you have to feed. So it ends up being less than 10% fat, whereas whole maternal colostrum would be in excess of 35% fat,
Hmm.
probably even higher. So the composition is slightly different in the Premolac product than some other more full composition products, but it is still a cow-derived,
Hmm.
colostrum-derived product.
But the reason why I bring that up, listeners, because you know me, I don't normally talk about products per se or zoom in on specific things, just more the science. But this is really important because you could easily see how that product being a different percentage of fat could in fact change the way that abomasal emptying might happen. And so that was part of the purpose of this research project and could have impacts. So you need to be mindful of that as you're taking this information that you're listening to and applying it there on your farm. So
Yeah.
that's the biggest detail that I wanted to draw attention to. So,
In our study, we found that it was safe and effective to directly add this dry Premolac powder into the moderate quality maternal colostrum, and we achieved that bump in serum IgG that we wanted to achieve. But to your point, Reagan, producers should be careful extrapolating or generalizing that to all colostrum replacers on the market that may or may not be true of other products. They would need to be tested separately to see if that same practice is still safe and effective. Correct.
for sure. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about health. What'd you see
Yeah.
with this group of calves? It was kind of exciting.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing we want to look at is transfer of passive immunity. And did we, what kind of levels in the blood did we get? And we've already talked about that.
You knocked that out of the park.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was we learned something there. But the other thing we wanted to examine was impact on behavior, on appetite, and on health for the first 3 days after enrollment, after that day of birth.
Hmm.
Because back to our original point, like in one group, we were feeding a hyperosmolar mixture that in theory could maybe create some digestive upset, at least according to,
Scours. Yeah.
yeah, scours or things like that,
Hmm.
potentially. Versus in the other group, we were feeding that larger volume, and maybe that larger volume could interfere with
Disrupt. Yeah.
appetite or cause some discomfort, abdominal discomfort on delivery. So there were reasons to look at behavior and health in both those groups to just
Hmm.
to make sure that we weren't messing things up as compared to our control groups, just the straight maternal colostrum that was not enriched.
Hmm.
And thankfully, we saw no differences in behavior. We were videotaping calves during the colostrum delivery, the colostrum feeding, and for 1 hour post feeding to look at various behaviors, time standing up, time laying down, time, vocalizing or struggling, or were there any
Chewing. Yeah.
indications of discomfort, and we saw no differences across the 4 treatment groups there, which was good. And then looking at appetite for the milk feeding the next day and for the next 3 days, there was no difference there. And then looking at for health scores, they were scored daily, and we're looking at things like, their rectal temperature, do they have scours, do they have any evidence of respiratory disease, runny nose, runny eyes,
Hmm.
depression, coughing, that kind of thing. And in our two enriched groups, there was no difference in
Hmm.
health or any of that kind of thing. The only health difference noted in the whole study was we did see an increased proportion of calves with an elevated fecal score, meaning scours. So a higher
Hmm.
proportion of calves did have scours in that first 3 days in the group that received the only the moderate quality maternal colostrum that was unenriched. That was kind of our negative
Hmm.
control group. And that makes a little bit of sense in that
Yeah.
group got the smallest dose of antibodies delivered, the smallest level of protective antibodies in their blood. So they had the lowest level of transfer of passive immunity. And in fact, we did see a higher proportion of those calves that scoured. So that makes biological sense. It wasn't excessive,
Yeah.
but it was certainly higher than the
Noteworthy. Hmm.
enriched groups or the high quality maternal colostrum.
I would like you to talk a little bit about just a general sanitation as guys are thinking about maybe adding this supplement to the colostrum. Could you talk a little bit about the TCCs that you were finding in the different treatments or the total coliform counts and where those points of concern might be found?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Reagan. We've done a fair bit of research over the years on the importance of having feeding clean colostrum, meaning low levels of bacterial contamination. And so we cultured all of the colostrum fed in this study, got a total plate count, total bacteria count, and a total coliform count or TCC, what you just mentioned. And in past studies, in prior studies, we have observed that if there are high bacteria counts, in particular coliform counts, in the colostrum that you feed, that in some way, shape, or form, it interferes with IG absorption. It may be a binding effect, it may be a blocking effect, blocking in the small intestine, blocking absorption of the IG molecule across the intestine. We're not sure of the mechanism, but the bottom line is if you feed dirty colostrum, you are going to have lower levels of passive transfer and you are going to see higher rates of
Hmm.
scours.
Hmm.
Well, all of the colostrum that we fed was heat treated before it was used in the study. That was just a routine practice on the farm. They always heat treat all of their colostrum. So all of the baseline colostrum we started with was very clean. But in the two groups where we added the powder in when we were enriching, well, we had to dump the heat-treated colostrum into a stainless steel bucket. We had to, mix up the water and the powder for the reconstituted group, or just add in the powder in the unreconstituted group, mix it up, put it through a funnel back into a feeding bottle, attach the tube. So there were added steps of preparing
Hmm.
our mixture and as clean as we thought we were, we're
Hmm.
trying to use sanitized buckets and whisks and whatnot, we still saw a higher level of coliform counts in the two groups colostrum was enriched. And I
Hmm.
attribute that to those extra steps of transferring and mixing and all the rest of it. So that higher level of bacteria counts could be in part explaining a little bit of the reduced efficiency of absorption that we saw in those same two groups in the enriched groups. So my take home to producers, whether you're enriching or not, colostrum replacer or not, most people are not enriching, they're just feeding maternal colostrum. It's really important that this is clean.
Hmm.
This one of the hallmarks of a good colostrum management program. And if you've never looked into this, have a chat with your veterinarian, collect and freeze some colostrum samples that you're in the process of feeding to a calf. Just put it in a little mastitis sample vial, date it, throw it in the freezer, and have your vet do some cultures, just a total plate count or a total coliform count, and see what kind of numbers you're getting. If it's relatively clean, yay, good for you.
Right.
But if it's really polluted, really high bacteria counts, then you want to look at what are your protocols, your SOPs for collecting, storing, you know,
Hmm.
keeping that colostrum clean, keeping it from getting contaminated or bacteria from growing up. And if it's appropriate, considering adopting something like heat treating colostrum on farm, which we know has benefits.
Boy, I tell you, if we could just pause and step away from this paper for 2 seconds, guys, the number of milk pails that I've seen in parlors that are just completely inadequate is countless. And
Yep.
so not only will that damage the possibility of a successful transfer of passive immunity, but guys, that could impact your PI count every time you hook it up. It could definitely negatively impact that too. So take 2 seconds. If you're listening to this right now, take the lid off of that dump can and just give it a gander and make sure that that's right, and maybe even consider implementing an SOP that looks like sanitizing that once a month or once a week or whatever you
Once a day.
once a day. All right, good, good,
Uh-huh.
good. Yeah, right.
Yep.
Love that. And so, awesome. Well, this has been super informative, but I really love to ask my favorite question, which is, what's one thing that you want these boots on the ground dairy producers to gain from this really informative project?
Well, apart from our objective, we found that it was safe to add this Premolac powder directly to moderate quality maternal colostrum. I mean, that's the major take home. It was effective and it was safe. I would just like to back up and comment on hopefully not needing to worry about colostrum replacers because we're going to work on producing a sufficient volume of high quality clean colostrum from the cows,
Right.
just managing our colostrum program in such a way that this is hopefully a rare event that you do need to enrich. So paying
Hmm.
attention to the quality, the quantity, the quickness, the cleanliness. And how do you know that it's working? You monitor either serum total protein levels in your calves or you monitor serum brix levels in your calves. That's the place to start. Ask the calves. The calves won't
Hmm.
lie. So
Right.
have your veterinarian draw some blood samples, make a point of regularly bleeding 15 or 20 calves once a week, once a month, depending on farm size. Look at your transfer of passive immunity levels. If they're high, according to our industry goals, good for you.
Greater than 25, right? I hate to interrupt, but let's quantify that.
Well, yeah, so it depends on what test you're using on farm. So the gold standard is to send the serum off to a lab and have serum IgG, but nobody on farm is going to do that. It's too
Right.
expensive. It takes too much time. So on farm, we used one of two different indirect tests that are really quick and convenient. Serum total proteins is one approach,
Hmm.
or serum brix readings is the other approach. So yeah, so if it was serum IgG, an excellent value would be greater than 25, to your point, Reagan, grams per liter in the blood. But if we're using an indirect test like serum total protein, an excellent would be greater than 6.2. A good would be greater than 5.8, and a fair would be greater than 5.1. So, but ideally, I want, 70 or 80% of my calves tested to be at a serum total protein of 5.8 or higher. That
Mm.
would be in the good or excellent range. And if you're achieving that, good for you. However, if you're not, or if you want to work on getting things better, then call in your vet and just review the quality, quantity, quickness, cleanliness, and look for opportunities to get better.
You bet. Well, this has been a great discussion, and I want to thank you for your time, Doc. And listeners, I applaud you for taking time out of your day to learn about how supplementing moderate quality colostrum can have a direct impact on the success of your calves. I've really enjoyed our conversation. This has been the February edition of the Dairy Science Digest, which is a monthly podcast project designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to your ears. We highlight peer-reviewed research articles that are actively impressed because it's sound science that you can base your management decisions around, and it's provided to you by your University of Missouri Dairy team. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get future editions straight to your cell phone. This is Reagan Bluel with the Dairy Science Digest, and I hope you have a great day.